Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us this afternoon with Lacey Genta. She is here again. So thanks, Lacey. You were here at the beginning of the month, and we get to have you back again. And another important topic for families. She's a rock star. She works at ChildServe, and she's a great resource for families, whether you access ChildServe or not. She is very open to sharing and at least trying to answer questions or get you in the right direction. So feel free to reach out to her. She is going to speak to the waiver services, again, a topic that we've heard from families that have lots of questions around. And this is about the CCU, Consumer Choice Option. And she's going to unpack it and help you better understand what that would mean if you choose that route and what are the steps to help that happen when you're looking at your waiver services. Thank you again for joining Ask an Expert. And I'm going to turn it over to Lacey.
Wonderful. I will share my screen. So consumer choice options a lot, and in case management, we deal with all acronyms. And so I'll shorten it to CCO for the rest of the presentation, but just know that that's what I'm referring to. And like Deb said, I am a case manager at ChildServe. I've been there over 16 years. This is something that a lot of families we work with in ChildServe case management utilize. And so my experience is just helping families through that process since its inception a dozen years ago. This will just be a broad overview, and then if you have questions or more specifics, you can definitely ask those. It should always be individualized. So consumer choice option, it should always be individualized. So somebody's budget that you know of that they have won't necessarily work for you. It won't be the same for you if you decide to go this route. So in order to get started with CCO, you have to have a waiver. So it's an HCBS service through the waiver programs. And so your gatekeeper is having a waiver, and then you can access CCO. Through the waivers, you can have traditional providers like ChildServe, the Respite Connection, Hope, lots of different provider agencies out there to manage your services, or you can self-direct them. And self-directing them would be the CCO option. And we have families who do both. So you can have all traditional, or you can have all CCO, or you can have a mix of traditional provider agencies in addition to hiring your own staff. When you select CCO, you're signing on to hire your own staff and purchase your own services. You'll work within your team to develop your budget, and then you'll be the one directing those services along with the team. So who's the team? This is who you're going to be collaborating with if you decide to go through CCO. I'll use the term member just because that's what Medicaid uses, a Medicaid member. So that's the person who has the waiver. That person is technically the employer. If it's a 5-year-old, the 5-year-old is the employer, but they don't have the ability to sign into contracts or sign off on time cards. And so they'll elect someone to be their budget authority. For children, a lot of times it's a parent or guardian. For adults, so 18 and over, they could be their own budget authority if they so choose, but maybe they need more help or more support with that. And so they can elect to have a budget authority to act as the employer for them on their behalf. Then there's also the case manager. Case manager is going to help determine what services go into the budget to make your CCO budget. And then you'll have your independent support broker. That's the person who's going to help develop the budget. And then you'll have your financial management service. So that's the one that's going to manage the budget once it's been set up. All of these people work together. They collaborate as a team. You can't really do CCO effectively if you're missing any of these pieces. I'll just explain a little bit more on who each of the players are in the CCO game. For the budget authority, that's the employer. So your job is to recruit, hire, train, and fire your employees. For families or individuals that CCO works best for, it's typically people who are organized. It's also people who have access to people to hire. So if you don't have anybody to recruit, CCO might not be the best option for you. You might need to go through a provider agency who can use their resources to help you find staff. So you have to have access to that recruitment piece. You have to have people that you want to hire to provide your services. CCO also works best for people who have consistent care needs or can plan at least a month in advance. It's totally fine if your services are more willy-nilly and some months it's higher and some months it's lower, but you don't know when that's going to be. Then CCO is tricky because your budget is set for the month and then you adjust it for future months. And so if on the 20th of the month you decide that you need a whole bunch more service, it's really hard to do that with CCO versus traditional services where you can just talk to the team and make adjustments a little bit more fluidly. The budget authority also is doing the approvals. So you'll work with the team to develop the budget and then they're signing off saying, yep, that budget's going to work for the member or for myself. And then also they're going to certify that the services that have been provided by the employees have actually been provided. So they're going to sign off on time cards on the staff documentation saying, yep, that service was provided and they need to be paid for that. Communication is also huge for that employer because they have to manage the services. So it needs to be a person who's kind of close. And so they're going to need to know, are the services meeting the needs, the number of hours that are being used, and be able to track that and manage that to help either themselves or the person that they are working with to manage their budget. The case manager, their role is to kind of assess the needs. So their job is going to be to develop that care plan. And then based on that care plan, they're going to say, these are the needs and this is the services that can meet those needs. And then they can talk with the family about what services make sense to do under CCO. In the system, they're going to authorize the funding. So whether that's through IME for fee for service or through the MCO, they're going to determine how many of the services, how many hours or how many units are going to be transitioned to a CCO budget and get that approved. The role of the case manager is also to maintain the integrity of the program. At the end of the day, all services under all waivers, traditional or CCO, have to be medically necessary. The additional piece for CCO is that they also have to be cost neutral. So a service can't cost more when you're self-directing it than what it would cost if you were getting it through a traditional provider agency. If it does cost more, then they're going to say, you should probably go through a provider agency to get that because it's looking like how you've got it set up is going to be more expensive for the state and it needs to be either the same or cost neutral or less. So potentially you could get your services in a way that's more efficient to where you have money left over in your budget. And we'll talk about how that works later on in the presentation. The case manager is also responsible for care coordination, so communicating with that team and really monitoring the services. You know, we've got it all set up now. Does it still meet your need? Or got a change coming up? What do we need to do to change the budget? They also want to make sure that goal progress is being made. If your goal is to get care, or your goal is to get a job, or your goal is to learn a new skill, then the case manager is monitoring and tracking that goal progress. For the independent support broker, they get specialized training to help set up the budget for families or for individuals. Each budget is individualized. You know, if your neighbor is doing CCO, their budget is probably going to look a lot different than yours, even if you have a similar situation. So it should all be individualized. The independent support broker, it's also known as the ISB, they're going to help explain the budget process to the family, hopefully, and then help fill out the packets, explain the processes and the amounts, help you decide on wages, hours, units, and then also they're doing all of that while staying within that monthly amount. They're going to help prioritize services. Like I said earlier, sometimes your services come in less costly, but are still meeting your need. So you might have a little bit of flexibility in your funding. And so that ISB can help you decide, does it make sense to maybe squeak out a few more hours of service for that individual? So maybe they've got 30 hours of service that they've moved over, but it's so cost efficient that they could get 35 hours that month. Or another option could be you want to maintain your staff and you've got a little bit extra money left over in your budget. And so you say, we're going to raise their wages a little bit to utilize all of those funds to stay within the budget amount. The ISB is also acting as a liaison. So once the budget's developed, they're the one who submits it to the financial management service. They also, if there's any issues or anything that comes up, they're the first link to the family to where they're going to explain that and get those changes made. They're also going to be the liaison for the family of how the process works. They're available to families as change arises. For younger kiddos who are on the CCO program, they have more time in the summer, maybe let's say they're in a school setting during the school year, and in the summer they got more time to work on their goals. Their plan could look very different in the summer than it does during the school year. And so they're going to contact their ISB, they're going to contact their case manager, and they're going to develop a new plan. Once you get it set, it doesn't have to stay the same. It's a monthly budget, but it can change month to month to meet that person's needs. The financial management service, so they're the one that seems the most behind the scenes, but they're the integral part that's working through all the hiring process, all the background checks, the state and federal forms, the taxes. They're billing the MCOs or Iowa Medicaid for the service, processing the invoices for any goods or services that you're purchasing. They're also managing all the employee payroll. So every CCO employee payroll is done through Veridian. And they're also approving those budgets and helping to figure out, is there missing paperwork or does something need another level of approval? And so right now in the state of Iowa, it has since its inception of CCO, Veridian is the only contracted financial management service. Sometimes in other states, you have a choice of financial management providers, but Veridian has done a very good job, and they're our choice for Iowa. They also have a great website, people who are web savvy. If you go to, or you can Google CCO Iowa Veridian, it has some additional information and forms that you can take a peek at there too. So not all services can be switched from traditional to CCO. Here's a listing of all of them that can be, and they vary by waiver because not all waiver services are available under all of the waivers. And so they vary naturally, but then some of them are available as CCO services. All of the services, traditional or CCO, have to be medically necessary. They have to be based on the need, based on your disability. And it should be documented in your care plan why you need it. So they all have to be justified as medically necessary. So just because your waiver has homemaker service, if that's not a need, that wouldn't go into your CCO budget because it's not a need. But if your waiver does offer the homemaker service and that's a need for you, then that's something that can be transitioned over into a CCO budget. And there's several services that can't go into the CCO program. Skilled services, so services that require medical oversight, those ones can't be self-directed. Nursing services, things that require a higher level of care, it's not an option right now to do those skilled services under CCO. Services that are available through Medicaid already. So there's a hierarchy of accessing services. And so if something's available through your traditional Medicaid, then you shouldn't be using waiver funds for it. So for an example, if you have a need for physical therapy, then that's a service that based on medical necessity can be provided through Medicaid. And so you would go through your Medicaid provider to get physical therapy. It wouldn't be an option to say that you wanted to privately hire your own physical therapist and use waiver funds for that because you would already have access to it through Medicaid. So then you can't access waiver funds for it. Childcare comes up all the time. It's a huge need. But childcare isn't a waiver service. There's a lot of cares that are waiver services, but childcare, traditional regular daycare isn't one of them. And so that one's not available on traditional waiver. It's also not available on CCO. And then anything that's non-FDA approved, like medications or treatments or therapies, supplements. And some people have really great ideas about these things that could be really beneficial for their person. And the idea that the reason why they're not available under CCO is that we don't want to use any waiver or Medicaid funds to pay for something that could potentially be unsafe for the person. So those things aren't covered either. Things like home furnishing, home repairs, typical home maintenance, those things are not available under CCO. That being said, if your waiver has home modification can be done under CCO. So it has to be a modification that's specific to your disability and it has to be approved in advance. And those things can. It's just the traditional regular home maintenance stuff that's not. Room, board, rent, mortgage, all of those things are not CCO. School tuition, service animals, personal entertainment items. Again, it's going back to the notion that everything has to be medically necessary. So vacation expenses, if you are going on vacation and you need care while on vacation, or you need some help to access the community while you're on vacation, those things, you can hire somebody to provide that. But the actual vacation expenses, like your hotel or your event ticket or your plane ticket, those things aren't a CCO option. And then motorized vehicles or vehicle repairs and vehicle maintenance. For some waivers, they have vehicle modification funding, and that can be provided under CCO. But traditional or CCO, it doesn't actually pay for the vehicle. It only pays for the modifications to that vehicle. So things like your tire repair, your oil change, you can't do it under traditional and you can't do it under CCO, but you can do the modifications. So modifications for driver adaptations or for wheelchair accessibility, you can do those under CCO, just not the vehicle itself. So this screen has a lot on it, and so I apologize for that. I just wanted to give an example of what a budget looks like. This is a portion of a CCO budget. So when you're working with your ISB and your case manager, this is the form that the ISB is going to be filling out. And so you'll see in the bright green stars, that's the budget amount. So that's the amount that your case manager has determined. When you guys have your care plan meeting, you determine how much service is going to go into your CCO budget, and they get that amount approved. And so that number gets to be put as the total available monthly allowance. And then every single month, financial management service fee comes out. And this is the form that I pulled up last week. They don't have it updated. The actual amount is a little bit higher than that, but that's a monthly amount. Every month, the financial management service has a fee that comes out of your budget, and that's to process all the payroll and do all the billing and everything. And then you have your independent support broker. So that's another person that you're hiring. And so they have a fee to support you in developing your budget. And so initially you're going to see that that amount is higher because you're going to need more help to get your budget set up in the beginning. And then down the road, if your independent support broker is needed to make changes to your budget or to help you process a change in employee or things like that, then they'll bill for their service. So an independent support broker is an employee, and it can, sometimes it looks like a monthly fee. And if there's no service provided, just like respite, if there's no service provided, nothing is billed. Independent support broker is the same way. So if they don't provide any service that month, they're not billing for anything that month, but they do potentially stay on the budget in case you do have a need, but it's not billed unless you actually utilize their services. In the yellow stars is where you're going to hire your employee or purchase your goods and services. If you have care providers that you've hired, you're going to put those people, their name, what service they're going to provide for you, and you're going to decide their wage. The ISB is going to work with you on that to calculate all of those columns. If you have community supports or getting help with employment, the next page, you'll see that that's where you add those employees. And then if you have services that maybe isn't an hourly service that you need to purchase, or a good, an item that you're going to be purchasing, then you can put those in that third gold star. For savings, one option is to do savings for future services or for an item that you're going to save for and purchase down the road. The savings comes usually from efficiencies in the budget or future services that you're planning ahead that you're going to know that you're going to need in the future. So one example is respite services, and you'll see from chapter 78, any unused respite has to be used for future respite. So that's one where it doesn't really mold and change into something new. They want to keep respite used to give the caregiver, the usual caregiver, a break. A lot of times people will put respite in their savings, knowing that that is something that's a little bit more variable. You might have a month where you use a lot more respite, and so you can pull that from savings. Or you might have a month that you don't use very much respite, but you want to use it in the future, so you can put that into savings. Another option is to build your savings based on efficiencies. If you read the information at the top, efficiencies are if your budget is cost neutral, which means you need 40 hours of a service in a month and you're getting 40 hours of service out of your CCO budget, and then you've got some money left over, you've got some options with that money. One option can be to increase staff wages. One option could be to increase the service. So got 40 hours approved, you're getting 40, but you can afford 44 hours. So you increase and you actually are more efficient. So you get more service for the same amount what you would get on the traditional side of 40. The third option is if you've got that money left over, you could put it into savings for something in the future. That savings item has to be identified in advance. So it can't be that over the course of the last 6 months, you've had $100 left over every single month. Now you're thinking, ooh, it's been 6 months. Now I would have had $600. I want to put that towards savings for a specific good or service. So it has to be in advance. So when you're working with your ISB, if they say, oh, you've got $100 left over in your budget, and that's probably a pretty high efficiency. But if you've got money left in your budget, then you can elect what you want to be saving for from the beginning, and then future budgets can go towards that savings. An example of savings could be a specific piece of equipment and it's medically necessary, not covered under Medicaid, not covered under your waiver, but you really need that piece of equipment. So you're going to get that approved in advance and then you can start saving for it. So maybe you have $100 left over and you're putting that into saving towards this piece of medically necessary equipment. Another option could be a service. So let's say you need one-on-one swim lessons and you've got money left over in your budget, and that makes the most sense for your individual, that they can use that funding to pay for those specialized swim lessons. And so that could be an option. It has to be approved in advance. They have to show medical necessity for that. Once it's in the budget, you can use money to save to pay for those services or use your efficiencies to pay for those services. And then at the end of the day, it goes back to your budget. All of the services have to stay within your monthly allowance. Usually the biggest things to remember is that you have to take into account all of your taxes and your fees. So that's something that the ISB can help you with. They do it budget after budget, so they're very good at it. But you have to take those into account. So just because your budget is $1,500, you have to work within the means of the budget. The other thing is that all services have to be medically necessary, and then that piece of services must be cost neutral. Again, if you have 40 hours of a service authorized for a month, then on your budget, you need to account for those 40 hours, because in the care plan, what it's saying is that this person has a need for 40 hours. And so if under CCO you're getting less than that, then CCO is not meeting your need. There is an option to get more than that. It also has to be, the cost has to match. If a service costs X dollars on the traditional side, and then on the CCO side, it costs X plus 10, then it's too expensive of a service to be able to be self-directed. So then we would look at, how do we find it in a cheaper fashion, or how do we make it work at a lower cost, or should that service be something that's directed through a traditional provider agency? And then being able to plan ahead. When you're doing CCO, some services through your waiver have an annual cap. For example, ID waiver folks have an annual cap for their respite services, but CCO is a monthly service. So you have to think in the terms of, I've got this annual cap amount, and if I use all of my respite in a year, then I've got to divide that by 12, or I've got to make sure that my monthly budget in the course of a year doesn't go over that annual amount. So you have to look at it from a monthly standpoint, and then at least plan 1 month in advance. So if you have 12 budgets a year, you can make changes every single month. You can have a different budget every month if you need to. I will tell you that will be cumbersome, and CCO might be a little trickier for you, but you can do that. At the same time, if you have a change, typically the amount can't change within a month. You can reallocate some stuff in a month, but you usually have to plan a month in advance. And so the best way to go about it is look at, what are your service needs? Who are your employees available? What hours does your person need services? And look at it a week at a time and decide, how many hours am I going to receive that service in a week's time? And then figure out how many weeks are in that month. What does my budget look like based on my needs? You're going to need to be able to, like in October right now, we're thinking about, with school breaks coming up in November, if we need to make changes to our budget, or winter breaks coming up in December, if we need to make changes to our budget now is the time to be doing it, because we need to plan in advance for those monthly budgets. The best case scenario is that you have a well-oiled machine. And so it is a lot of work in the beginning and it feels kind of heavy. There's a lot of paperwork and there's a lot of new terms and new topics and a different way of thinking about waiver services than maybe you've experienced before if you've only done traditional services before. For families where it works well for them, it's more manageable after that initial get started piece. So typically once you get it started, it's not a quick process because everything takes a little bit of time. The process really moves through the different people on your team before it's ready to go live. For the families that CCO works for, the headache in the beginning to get it all started is worth it in the end. If you are thinking, wow, that's a lot, you might be thinking, this is not for me. I would rather just have an agency take care of this for me. I don't want to hire my people. I don't want to train my people. I want somebody else to do that for me. That's totally fine. And you can try it and decide that you don't want to do it later also. If you're thinking, I think we could do this, or I think this makes the most sense for my person or for our family, then you're asking, how do you get started? The first step is really talking to your case manager. The case manager should be giving you the option at least annually and explain that CCO is available to you. Depending on your own services or depending on your own style, it may not be the best fit, and that's okay. But just so you know that CCO should be an option for you. The case manager is going to say, okay, well, let's talk about what services that you have now or what services aren't meeting your need that potentially you could manage under CCO. So you're going to have that initial conversation to get that process started and talk through what are the pros and cons of doing CCO. And if it's something that you want to move forward with, then the case manager initiates the process. So they say, oh, I have a person who wants to do CCO, and they start the process where it'll trigger an authorization and for packets to be sent out. Families, when they're first getting started, talk to your potential employees. If you have someone who you've hired or had hired at a provider agency, so maybe your neighbor, you've hired them to provide services and they go through a provider agency now, talk to them about would they want to do it through CCO. It's always disappointing when you think you have people in mind and then you go to start the process and they're like, I think I'm going to keep it the way that we've been doing it. Or if you don't have any potential employees, we've had families who are like, oh, I really want to do CCO, but who am I going to hire? Then we have to have those kind of people in our back pocket before we get the process started. Once you decide, yep, this is going to work for me and I've got people to hire, you're going to get those packets sent out and you're going to pick out an ISB. So the ISB is the independent support broker, and that's the person who's going to help you with your budget. And there is a list available of everybody who's gone through the training. And if they're taking on new clients, you can talk to other people who've been utilizing CCO, of who they use and what their experience have been. You can also just call. They have their contact information, call or email, and find out, is that person going to work for you as an ISB? The other option is just like any person that you hire, they're changeable. If it's not working the next month, you can pick somebody else who might be a better fit, just same as with your employees. And then you're going to complete the packet. Best case scenario, you're going to meet virtually, in person, however it works for you. Some families can do the whole process over email. Some families need hands-on to actually look at the packets together. But the packets, they have a lot of information in them. So there'll be an employer packet, which is for the individual or that budget authority to fill out as the employer. There'll be the ISB packet where they're going to fill out, yep, I'm going to work with you as your ISB. And so you're going to hire them and they'll have their packet to fill out. And then you'll have your employee packets, which if you have 7 employees, you'll have 7 employee packets. Those will all need to be filled out. And so those have your W-9 information, all your tax information, and how you're going to have your agreements of how the working relationship is going to work. So it is a big responsibility, and you are responsible for their training and the hiring and the firing if need be. All of the pieces of the packet have to be completed. And I hear from families all of the time of like, that's the biggest thing is you've got all this paperwork and you work so hard and then you find out you're missing a page or something didn't get scanned in correctly. And so it slows the whole process down. But a good ISB can help walk through employees and employers through the packet process and get those filled out. And case managers can help with that as well. And then once you've got your essential pieces, you're going to put it all together on your budget. When you're developing your budget, again, it's based on medical necessity for services, but you'll be able to decide who you're hiring, what you're going to pay them, you're going to schedule them, you're going to decide what hours they're going to work. And there's still all of the requirements as far as there's workers' comp available to your CCO employees. And if they work more than 40 hours in a week, they get time and a half and all of those things. So, and that's something that can all be talked through when you're talking about what your schedule looks like. And then you're training them. So if they're supposed to help you develop a skill, then you're talking through what that's going to look like. Or if they're supposed to help you do some supportive employment tasks, or if they're going to help you get dressed in the morning, then somebody, either you or your budget authority, is going to help train them to figure out what does that look like and how do you want it done. And then you're going to manage that over the course of time of, is this person working out? Do we need to add more employees? Do we need to add more hours? It's all based on utilization. So if you have a budget that's $1,500, but you're only using $500 of it, then over time, then you're going to want your budget to more closely match what you're actually utilizing. Even if your needs are greater, if you're not actually utilizing that higher amount, you're going to want your budget to match what your utilization is. For MCOs, they bill over the course of the month after the service is provided. For fee-for-service individuals, they bill the entire budget amount at the beginning of the month, and then they use that money to pay your employees. They both work the same, they just look a little bit different on the backside. I will tell families that it does seem like a lot to begin with, but once you kind of get it rolling, for the families that it works for, it is worth it. Any questions that families or providers, or if you're thinking about CCO, if that's an option for you, or if you have some ways that CCO has been really beneficial for you and you want to make sure other people know. I am also on CCO Task Force. It's a program where DHS put together. It's about 40 some people, where there are people receiving CCO, people providing CCO, the MCOs are there, the fee-for-service case managers are there. It's really a collaborative effort to make CCO better. If there's feedback like that, feel free. You can email me. My email is on there, laceymo@childserve.org. You can email me that information too. And we meet monthly right now, and I can share that with our CCO task force team as well.
Great. Thanks, Lacey. So we have a variety of questions. So we'll kind of work through them. But the one thing I've seen pop up is I think there's an ISB person on here. And so wanted to do some clarifying that the employee application and all forms and such are already built for families. And so it's really recruiting and using these forms to hire employees. Also, they do run background checks along with employee applications. This person just wanted the families to know that they don't have to create all those things and that there is at least a background check done. So just clarifying that. And the other thing that popped up, you had said that there's no fee if they don't do anything. And the ISB person wrote that sometimes they have to still do some checking or review, and so they may see a fee on there.
Yeah, if a service is provided, then yes, they'll bill for that service. But we do have families who things are smooth sailing and they set it up, and then their So a point to think about is in the beginning, your ISB fee is typically bigger. And so you have to figure out how you're going to make that work in your budget, because when you're first setting it up, if you need your ISB to help you for 5 hours, so you're going to be paying them 5 hours of wages, that's going to change what your budget looks like down the road. If everything is smooth sailing and maybe they only need to bill for 1 hour, or they don't need to bill at all because everything is fine, then your budget will reflect that. You won't have that bigger ISB amount coming out that you have to account for.
One person asked, are there limits to how much you can pay your providers?
One thing that CCO is kind of known for is being able to have flexibility to decide your employees' wages. For individuals receiving a lot of services who they have maybe a bigger budget, they have even more flexibility. What's tricky is if you have a really tiny budget, so if your budget is $300 a month, there's no wiggle room. You pay for the services at cost, basically. If you have a lot of service needs and you have a bigger budget and several employees, you might have some flexibility to pay them a wage that's higher than what they might have experienced at a provider agency. That being said, it still all has to be cost neutral. And so it's a balancing act. It really is. And it's individualized. And so there is the option in every CCO budget to set the employee wage, but the amount of flexibility varies depending on the budget and the services that you're receiving and the amount of service that you're receiving. So that's a great question to bring up with your case manager and your ISB, because at the end of the day, it does have to be cost neutral. So if you have a staff that you want to pay $20 an hour, and if that's more expensive than what it would be to get on the traditional side, it's going to be really hard to justify that it needs to be more expensive of a service, because the state would say then, oh, well, that service is too expensive for you to self-direct. You need to get that through a provider agency. And basically, it's also trying to be an advocate for you. You want to be able to reward your employees and you want to keep them long-term. And so you want to do your best to reimburse them what they're owed. We know that direct care staff don't make what they should. And so CCO can give you some flexibility in that, but it all goes back to, is it still cost neutral? And it has to be based on your own individual budget. And so there's no set maximum necessarily. It's all based individually on what your needs are. And is it still cost neutral? And can you make it all work out at the end of the day? That if you've got 40 hours or whatever your care needs are those care needs being met at the wages that you're paying your staff? So
Gotcha.
it's not an easy answer, and it's tricky. And we know that we want to pay our good staff. We want to pay them really well. And sometimes we have more flexibility to do that under the CCO program than we do through traditional providers. Sometimes not.
I love in the chat, we've had people ask questions and people have answered them. So they're going to have resource to each other. How do you go find an ISB? And somebody on here answered to go to the Veridian website. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there is on the DHS website, there's a list, but that one's actually not as up to date as the Veridian one. And the Veridian one's a little bit more user friendly. So that's where I lead families to go to, is just go to the Veridian website and there'll be a listing of all the ISBs with their contact information.
Okay. All right. One of the things was to clarify for families that CCO participants can turn to their ISB when they have questions about changing services, hiring new providers. So they're basically a support for the family, their first line of defense to be able to figure out some things, correct?
Yeah. So your ISB is going to help you every time you need a budget change. And so things that constitute a budget change are firing someone, hiring someone, changing a wage, changing the number of hours you're receiving, changing your schedule. As long as it's going to be ongoing, you can have some flexibility in that. But anytime there needs to be a change to the budget, anything at all on the budget, you're going to want to reach out to your ISB. And then if you have change in service needs, so let's say your budget isn't enough to meet your needs, then you're going to reach out to your case manager, and then you're going to pull in your ISB also, because every piece of the pie is needed. And yeah, so the ISB is integral in being able to support you with any changes. And they're a great resource. A lot of ISBs work with a lot of different families. So if they're taking on new people, it usually means that they serve a lot of families. There are some ISBs that aren't taking on new clients, typically because maybe they got into ISB work just to help a specific person or a few people, and they're not interested in taking on more. So some of the ISBs are working with lots of different families. They've seen lots of budgets. They've seen lots of scenarios and how things work, different waivers, different fee for service, different MCOs, all of that. And so your ISB is a great resource to be able to help you with those types of questions. And then absolutely any budget change, you're going to reach out to your ISB.
So when I went through the chat and looked at that, they either answered questions for each other, but just to reinforce what you just said, that the ISB person is definitely who you should reach out first to, because they have seen lots of budgets and lots of things, and they will have a better sense of how to guide you. Somebody just wrote, how can you determine pay? And again, it depends on the services. It's all those talk alouds kind of that they do with their ISB person.
Mhm.
And so again, just starting there and having that conversation, it sounds like is a good place to go. Tricky, but they have that experience. And I know talking to lots of families, then you start to get a sense of what works, what doesn't, what they've seen work in their area, et cetera. That can be a great resource. So
Correct.
just sounds like that's a good first step when trying to problem solve through and working through this process.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is if you are wondering, is CCO right for me or will it even work for me? I would start with your case manager there. Because once you have an ISP and you're relying on them, you need a budget so you can pay your ISP for all of the services that they're providing. And so if you don't have a budget yet, a lot of ISPs are very helpful, even if you haven't contracted to hire them. But you might just start the conversation with your case manager of, this is my idea, or, do you think we can do this? Or based on the services that we utilize, is CCO an option? That weighing the pros and cons might be a good start with your case manager. The families that hire a lot of their own staff, whether that be through a provider agency where they tap someone from church or they tap someone from school or tap someone in their neighborhood and say, hey, can you do this formally through a provider agency? Those people are already networking and building their own staff anyways. And so those people often do really well with CCO because they've been doing that already as part of their, the individual they're supporting's waiver services. So if you are already have your own pool of people that you've had hired at a provider agency, that may work great for you, and have the agency do all of the actual processing of the paperwork and the time cards and all of that. Or if you want to have more control over it, more flexibility, then it might be that those same people that you recruited, that you recruit them through CCO instead.
Well, thanks, Lacey, again for sharing Ask an Expert with Ask Resource Center. And I just want to encourage you to our next week activity is Ask Each Other. And I'd love to see all of you on there around the waiver services. You've been such a great support to each other. And so just join us as we continue the conversation. And then in November, our next series is around Chapter 103 in Seclusion and Restraint. And I appreciate everybody being here today. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you so much.